Hugh McLean walked across the parking lot to the cafeteria for lunch. He was on his second shift for lunch, and he was hungry after 5 hours of continuous work in the cab of his crane. As he approached the double doors leading to the cafeteria, he noticed small groups of workers, all engrossed in lively conversations. Something had happened, and if so many guys were talking about it, it couldn't be anything good. He wondered if someone had been killed on the job. That usually got everyone's attention. As he approached the first group, he spotted a man he knew and turned to him. "Hey, Bert, how's it going?" "Looks like the Iron Workers Union is going on strike this afternoon. They don't have a contract, and they think it's a good chance to impose one on the company." "Are you sure? What will it mean for the rest of us?" "I know the Operating Engineers Union won't let me cross the picket line, nor would I want to." Hugh was a little concerned, for there were only 3 days to go before the work was finished. He was ready to go home after 3 weeks away from the site. 3 weeks of 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week, and he couldn't wait to get back to his wife and adopted son. Jobs like this, when the plant stopped for major repairs, always meant good money, but terrible hours. The young guys liked them and said they had closing fever. But he was just about ready to find himself a normal job 5 days a week somewhere closer to home, a job that would allow him to spend nights with his family. He exchanged a few more phrases with the group, but still hadn't been able to find out anything much about the potential strike. There wasn't much time left before the lunch break, so he headed to the cafeteria to fill his empty stomach. While he ate, he managed to catch a glimpse of several pickup trucks pulling up and a group of white-helmeted executives who began addressing the workers in the parking lot. After finishing his meal, Hugh walked out with a styrofoam cup of coffee and managed to hear the general manager tell them to check the lists taped to the cafeteria wall, and that if your name wasn't on them, you were fired with 1 day's pay in lieu of proper notice. The strike was indeed going to happen, and while they thought it would only take a day or two to resolve, they were going to let some of the workers go, as they didn't need a full crew to finish the job. Hugh turned and saw a dozen sheets of paper pinned to the wall, and was in an advantageous position to be one of the first to familiarize himself with them. They were all arranged alphabetically, and he did not at once see that Hugh McLean was not there. He was glad of that, for it meant that he would be able to go home this afternoon and arrive there before midnight, if traffic did not interfere. It was only a few hours before he checked out of the warden's office and returned to the room he had rented to pack. After quickly stowing clean clothes and dirty linens in his suitcases, he picked up a framed photograph from the bedside table. He always took it with him when he traveled and kept it in a prominent place. It was a picture taken the day he and the former Donna Charles had gotten married 4 years ago. It had been a simple ceremony in front of a justice of the peace, with only his sister and Donna's mother in attendance. Of course, her son Bobby was also present, but he was only 2 years old at the time. He and Donna were both 28 years old in the picture, and he thought it was still a pretty good shot of the two of them. In the picture, they were standing under an oak tree outside the courthouse. They were holding hands, looking at the camera, and Bobby was standing in front of them with a big smile on his face. Hugh was about 6 feet tall, with black hair and dark eyes, a muscular build with a ruddy complexion that was typical of spending a lot of time outdoors. Donna was shorter than Hugh by about 5 inches, a pretty brunette with hazel eyes. She wore her hair relatively short, which blended well with her facial features. She weighed about 135 pounds and had graceful curves in all the right places. Since Hugh had met her, she had been working as a secretary in a small real estate office. When all his things were packed, he headed to his car to drive home. Before he left, he tried to call home, but the busy signal told him that Donna was sitting on the phone and probably talking to his sister Kathy. They were like sisters, always planning something together over a cup of coffee or on the phone. It didn't matter, though, because it would be great to surprise her by coming home for the weekend. With any luck, he might even be able to get home by 10 o'clock, and they could have a few beers or glasses of wine together. The drive from his workplace in central Minnesota to his home in central Illinois went more smoothly than he expected, and by 10:30 he pulled into his driveway, but found the house plunged into darkness. Damn, Donna must have gone to bed early, he thought to himself. gotta do something about this. A quick shower and he'd join her for a little catching up in the love department. He grabbed his suitcases and squeezed through the kitchen door. Donna, I'm home. Get your sleepy ass over here and kiss me gladly. Hugh set the suitcases down in the kitchen and headed down the hall to the bedroom. To his surprise, when he turned on the light, the bed was empty. A quick check of Bobby's room revealed that neither of them were in the house. Damn, he thought to himself, I should have called her. Putting the two suitcases in the bedroom, he headed for the door, since Donna could only be in one place. Since Bobby wasn't home either, they would have to drive to his older sister Kathy's house. It was only a 3-block drive, so he decided not to call her beforehand. A pleasant surprise would be much more interesting. He inquired if his brother-in-law Ralph was home. Ralph Roberts worked as a welder, often at out-of-town sites like the one Hugh worked at. They had 2 sons, 8-year-old Barry and 12-year-old Ralph Jr. As he pulled into Kathy's driveway, it was clear that Donna's car wasn't there. That made him somewhat curious, but since he hadn't checked the garage at home, she could have just walked up. He saw the light on in the kitchen, and as he entered his sister's house, he knocked on the door. Kathy was sitting at the kitchen table and looked up in amazement and shock when he opened the door. Jesus Christ, Hugh, you almost scared me to death. Where did you come from? You were supposed to be in Minnesota until Monday or Tuesday. It's a long story, Kathy. The iron workers went on strike and the company laid off a bunch of us early. I was one of the lucky ones. I got the rest of my shift today plus my full paycheck for tomorrow. It was a deal I couldn't pass up. Where's Donna? She's not home and neither is Bobby. As he spoke, Hugh poured himself a half cup of coffee and sat down at his sister's desk. Bobby's in the back bedroom right now, sleeping with my boys. Donna was invited over for drinks and cards with your friends Allison and Jerry. She said she might be late, and instead of waking Bobby up and taking him home, she asked if I could watch him for the night, as if that could be a problem. As she spoke, Hugh suddenly raised his head, and all expression disappeared from his face. When he spoke, there was a subtle change in the tone of his voice that Kathy did not notice. Did she say she was visiting Allison and Jerry? What time did she go there? He watched Katie carefully as he answered his questions. Right. She said she played cards with Allison and Jerry. I think she left here around 8:30. She said you two walk together a lot. She had dinner with them last Friday night, too. I don't mind, Bobby is really nice and she looks after my 2 when I need a babysitter. Yes, we visit them often. He and I work on a lot of cases together. Tell you what, I'm going to go and join them. Don't call and tell me I'm coming. I want it to be a surprise. Hugh stood up and drained his cup of coffee, then headed for the door. I'll call you tomorrow, Kathy. He quickly waved goodbye to his sister and then headed out the door. He had a look of serious concern on his face. As he drove to Allison and Jerry Black's house, many thoughts ran through his mind. The day before he left for work in Minnesota, he had gotten a phone call from Allison Black. Donna wasn't home at the time, so he chatted with her. The reason for the call was to tell him that she was leaving in the morning to visit her sister in California for a month. The sister was expecting twins and had asked Allison to come and help her through the last week of her pregnancy and the first few weeks at home with the newborns. Hugh was sure he had forgotten to tell Donna about that call. If Allison is in California, who, he wondered, was Donna visiting? If she wasn't at the Black House, where had she gone? He figured that maybe Allison had canceled the trip for some reason, or maybe Kathy had gotten the names wrong. He really hoped that was the case, since the alternative could have been major trouble. In their 4 years of marriage, he had never had any reason to doubt his wife, but in the back of his mind, the thought had already lingered that perhaps she was hiding something from him and his sister. Jerry Black had often talked about how much he appreciated Donna's looks and body curves. A couple of times, after having a few too many drinks, he had made a few leading remarks, at which Donna had laughed. At first, Hugh noticed Donna's looks, but what really interested him was her flamboyant personality. When he met her, she was a single mom, but after meeting Bobby, the fact that she had a child became irrelevant to him. He really liked her boy, and they had become very close once he and Donna became a couple. Lately, he had begun to think about officially adopting Bobby to give him the last name McLean. Hugh decided that he would stop by Allison and Jerry's first to see if his concerns were just foolishness. As he turned down the street toward their house, he realized that his heart was beating faster than usual. What if she isn't here? Or what if she is here and Allison is really in California? These thoughts raced through his mind as he pulled up in front of the Blacks' house. Jerry's car was in the driveway, but there was another car in front of it that he couldn't see. He hoped it wasn't his wife's car. The house was semi-dark, and he knew that if they were playing cards and drinking, they would be in the kitchen or living room, and it was obvious from the way he parked that there were no lights on downstairs. Staring at the house and the mysterious car in the shadows did nothing to calm Hugh's frantically pounding heart. After a moment's thought, he quietly got out of the car and, trying to be as quiet as possible, shut the door. He had to check out the mysterious car in the shadows to see if it belonged to his wife or not. When he went around the side of Jerry's red Mustang, his worst fears were confirmed. It was Donna's car. Apparently, she had passed Jerry's car and parked in front of it. Hugh was confused. He didn't know what to do, and he didn't understand exactly what was going on inside. He decided to walk around the house, figuring that maybe they were on the patio. Walking down the sidewalk on the side of the house, he began to feel calmer, convincing himself that they were sitting on the patio drinking beer. As he rounded the side of the house, however, he saw that the patio was empty. No one was enjoying a drink under the stars. He walked further into the backyard and looked up at the house. A dim light was burning in the window in the center of the top floor. He had been in the house often enough to know which room it was. Anger overwhelmed him, and he quickly headed to his car, opened the trunk, and pulled out the hammer he kept there. Walking purposefully towards the house, he took the hammer in his hand. Only as he approached the side door did he begin to slow his step and control his thoughts. Initially, he decided to use the spare key that he knew was under the mat by the door. He was already imagining their astonished faces as he entered the dimly lit master bedroom, swinging the hammer. Eventually, however, a vision of the consequences came to him, and he realized that he couldn't do that to another human being, regardless of his motives. He would have to kill himself as well, as he couldn't imagine living with the reality of what he was about to do. He stood at the back door, tapping the hammer lightly on his palm and contemplating what he should do. Finally, he backed away from the door and headed for his wife's car. Donna had a bad habit of leaving her keys in the tray on the center console when she parked the car. He always told her that it was an open invitation for someone to steal the car when the door was unlocked and the keys were in plain sight. He quietly opened the door, took the keys, and left the hammer on the driver's seat. Closing the door quietly, he got back into the car and drove off, heading toward the house he and Donna shared. The drive was only a few blocks, and as soon as he turned into the driveway, the full effect of what was happening came over him. The fatigue he felt after a long day of work and driving, combined with the realization that the woman he had fallen in love with was now in his former good friend's bed, brought tears to his eyes. For the next 10 minutes, which seemed like an hour, the tears flowed non-stop as he mourned what he had lost. Eventually, the grief began to be supplanted again by anger, a controlled anger that made him think of a plan, a way to save his pride and punish his cheating wife. As the plan formed, he regained control of his emotions, and 15 minutes later, he got out of the car and headed for the house with a look of determination on his face. The first thing he did was unload the 2 suitcases and take the dirty laundry to the laundry room. The dirty clothes could be washed while he went about his business. The empty suitcases lay on the bed, and he began to carefully fill them with his clothes from his closet and dresser drawers. When the 2 suitcases were completely full and held nothing else, he carried them to the car. He knew there were boxes in the basement, so he went downstairs and retrieved several of them, carefully dumping their contents into a pile on the basement floor. Donna could get replacements and put everything away later. He walked slowly through the house, picking up things that belonged to him. The house and the furniture belonged to Donna. She was already living in it when he met her, so there was no need to worry about who got what. Hugh knew he hadn't contributed many things to this house, although he could call some of them his own. The laptop he'd bought to replace the outdated computer system. The old system he'd left to Donna and Bobby. They had 2 DVD players, so he carefully removed the one hooked up to the TV in the basement and packed it into the car. By 3 in the morning, the car was full, and he went looking for a motel room for the weekend. He found a clean place about 3 miles from his former home and unloaded the first load from the car into the room. An hour later, he returned to the house and loaded more of what he considered his share of the community property. He put dishes and cutlery in one box, linens in another, and books, CDs, DVDs, and videotapes that he considered his own in a third. While packing, his work clothes were washed, dried, and put in the car. It took the last hour to put the tools from the basement and garage into the trunk of the car. By 6:30, he was done and slowly walked through the house looking for what he had missed. The last thing he found was a recent picture of Bobby, and he put it in his pocket. Finally, he sat down at the kitchen table, and after drinking a glass of cold water, he wrote a short note and put it in an envelope. The envelope was left lying in the middle of the kitchen table, and Donna's key ring pressed against it. As he left the door unlocked. Half an hour later, he was already putting away the rest of his belongings in his motel room. He spent the next 10 minutes under a hot shower, washing away the sweat and tears that came over him when he realized he was done. Climbing naked into bed, he fell asleep almost immediately. The long day, stress, and emotions had finally caught up with him. Donna McLean hurried down the sidewalk to her back door, frustrated that it was already 8:30, and she wanted to get home well before 8 so no one would see her return. Some stupid kids had stolen her car keys, and she quickly went home to get a spare set of keys. Jerry had offered her a ride, but she was very resentful of him and also worried about what the neighbors would think if a strange man gave her a ride home at this hour. It was safer for her to just walk home on her own. Her biggest fear was that her spare house key would be in the wrong place, at the bottom of her clothespin bag. As she approached the back door, she turned the knob out of habit and was surprised to see the door open in front of her. Silently cursing herself for forgetting to lock it, she hurried inside and set her purse on the counter. If she remembered correctly, the spare car keys should be in the drawer under the phone. Walking over to the phone, she glanced at the desk and realized something wasn't lying there. Stopping and taking a closer look, she realized that the missing bunch of keys were lying in the middle of the kitchen table. "How did they get there?" she said out loud without even realizing it. So shocked was she to see the key ring on the table. She reached for the keychain and then noticed the envelope underneath it. Curiosity was quickly replaced by anxiety, and she looked around to make sure no one else was in the room. With trembling hands, she picked up the envelope and pulled the paper out of it. At that moment, something fell out of the envelope and rolled across the kitchen floor. She thought she saw something under the edge of the counter, at the spot where the object had disappeared from view. Donna unfolded the paper and reread it twice before the realization of what it said reached her. When it did, she collapsed onto a kitchen chair, cradled her face in her hands, and sobbed. She began to repeat over and over, "God, no, God, no." This became her mantra as she sat on the chair rocking back and forth. Tears streamed down her cheeks and her hands that still covered her face. After a few minutes, the phrases she was saying changed to, "What have I done? What have I done?" Eventually, she calmed down enough to pick up the note and reread it again, hoping it didn't say what she thought it said. This time, she read it carefully. "You and this supposed friend of mine are lucky I didn't go upstairs and beat you to death with this hammer. Tell that bastard to stay out of my way. If he ever shows up at the construction site where I work, he might not survive. I took my stuff and I'm not coming back. If I left anything behind, you can do whatever you want with it. I'll let you explain to Bobby why I'm no longer around." She was still snorting and sobbing quietly when she stood up to see what had fallen to the floor. When she picked it up and saw that it was Hugh's wedding ring, she collapsed to her knees on the floor, and the tears and loud sobs returned. Hugh slept the sleep of the dead, waking only at 6 o'clock in the evening. He was awakened by an urgent need to pee, and he quickly got up and went to the bathroom. It wasn't until he was back in the main part of the motel room that memories of the previous night's events came over him. He stopped short, the pain of the previous night flashing through his mind, and he sat on the edge of the bed, contemplating what he should do next. The next half hour was spent sorting through his clothes, searching for the things he needed to get out of his room and eat dinner. Hunger was his main problem, for he hadn't eaten in almost 24 hours. The last time he had eaten a hamburger and fries was at the drive-thru on the way home. After getting dressed, he called the front desk to get a room for the next couple of days, then grabbed his cell phone and headed out to dinner. There was a cute cafe a block away from the motel, and he stopped in. After sitting down in a chair and placing his order, he pulled out his cell phone and turned it on. Almost immediately it rang, and he realized from the caller ID that it was his wife's phone number. He turned the phone off and slipped it back into his pocket. The last thing he wanted to do was talk to that bitch, he told himself. As he sat and thought about what had happened, he looked at the window he was sitting near and took a good look at his own reflection. He realized he hadn't combed his hair or shaved before leaving the motel. That was all he thought of himself as a normal person. The food looked very appetizing, but Hugh found that it was tasteless to him. All he could think about was what he had stumbled upon when he came home unexpectedly. How many times had that bitch visited his friends while he was working out of town? He never would have thought she was capable of such a thing, but the proof was in front of him. It suddenly occurred to him that maybe his own sister had known about this all along, and the anger returned. Upon reflection, however, he realized that she must not have known what Donna was up to, or she would have called her and warned her. He decided to call Kathy to let her know that he was okay. When he turned on his cell phone, he was informed that he had voicemail messages. He listened to the first 3 of them, but found that they were all variations of the same message. Donna was apologizing, crying, begging for forgiveness, begging him to call her. As he continued going through the messages, he hit the delete button as soon as he heard her voice. It wasn't until the 7th message that his sister's voice reached him. He listened to it. "Hugh, please call and let me know you're okay. Donna called me this morning and she's fine. It took a while, but I finally got her to tell me what happened. She says you left her, that you took all your stuff and moved out. Call me as soon as you get this message." The next 9 messages were from Donna, and he deleted them all without listening. The last message was another from his sister, begging him to call her. He sat down and stared at the phone, not knowing what he should do. Donna didn't seem to have told Kathy what was really going on. He ordered a cup of coffee and, when it arrived, dialed his sister's number. It rang 4 times, and then he switched to the answering machine and left her his message. Guess that bitch didn't tell you the whole story about why I left. Allison Black went to California the weekend I was out of town. Donna was there with Jerry, and they weren't playing cards in the kitchen. I'll have the divorce finalized as soon as I can get in touch with a lawyer. You can tell her to stop calling me because I won't listen to any more of her messages. After the first 3, I just deleted them all. Maybe I'll call you tomorrow or some other time. Bye. Hugh spent the next hour sipping his coffee with 2 refills. He couldn't believe that his happy marriage had faded so quickly into oblivion. He tried to think back over the years he'd spent with Donna and find a single memory that could lead him to believe she was cheating on him. He couldn't remember anything, but he felt that he had obviously missed something. How could she go from devoted wife to cheating whore right under his nose? His eyes filled with tears again as he thought of the good times, and there had been many. Eventually, he left and drove aimlessly around town for a while before finally returning to his motel room. A long nap and cups of coffee kept him awake, and he busied himself sorting through his hastily packed belongings. The room was connected to the internet, and he set up his laptop. The next hour passed quickly as he did his online banking, transferring his share from their joint accounts to his personal savings account. He was careful not to take every last dime he was entitled to. He wanted to take the high ground in the whole sordid affair. It was Saturday night, and he knew most of the Union boys would be at the Midway bar. By 11 o'clock, he had finished his banking and sorting, decided to clean up and go down to the bar to see if any of the guys knew what jobs were available. He decided that the best solution would be to find a good job out of town to get away from Donna and Jerry. He was starting to have some serious anger issues, and hanging around town wasn't going to help them, he was sure. Half an hour later, he was sitting with 3 other hoist machinists he had often worked with in the past. He quickly found out that the best job at the moment was in Alaska, where a large pumping station was being built for North Slope Oil. That meant working 6 weeks at a time with 2 days off. There were crane operator jobs available, as not many men wanted to take that job that required being out of town for so long. He thought, that sounds perfect. I can get away from this bitch and make enough money to set up my own place. After 2 beers with the guys, he bowed out and headed back to the motel, mulling over a fresh plan. By Wednesday morning, he'd gotten a lot done. He hired a lawyer to start divorce proceedings, citing irreconcilable differences as the reason, and left the lawyer with a list of things he'd taken and things he'd left behind, as well as his email address. At the union office, he was set up with the contractors doing the project in Alaska, and he signed all the papers, committing to spend at least 6 weeks on the North Slope. He found a storage company that would take his meager possessions and store them while he was away. Over the past few days, he'd deleted 24 more voicemails from Donna. He hadn't listened to a single one of them. The one call to his sister was again answered by an answering machine, so he simply told her he'd be in touch and turned off the cell service. At 11 a.m. on Wednesday, he boarded the first flight of a complicated series of connections that would get him to the North Slope by Thursday evening. He felt only relief as the plane taxied out of the landing tunnel. His car was parked in the long-term storage lot, his bags in the plane's hold, his laptop in the overhead compartment, and he was already beginning to distance himself from the source of the aching, empty feeling in his chest. As the plane took off, he leaned back in his seat and closed his eyes, but all he could see was the happy couple with the smiling little boy in the picture taken on their wedding day. The next week was a dizzying plane ride, a long ride in the school bus that took him to camp, a 2-day indoctrination and safety seminar, settling into a 10-foot by 12-foot dorm room, and the first 3 12-hour shifts at the construction site where he lifted pipes and equipment. The work was tedious, the meals were rushed, and the alarm clock rang too early. On the morning of his 4th day of work, Hugh woke up feeling much better, much more used to his new circumstances. After his shift, he set up his laptop, sent an email to his sister, and began exploring the features of his temporary home. Up until this point, all he had done was work, eat, and sleep. He had barely been able to think about Donna and her cheating, but he realized that it was time to begin his own healing, and the best way to do that was to approach it head-on. That night, when his shift was over and he headed to the cafeteria, Hugh decided to pay attention, and his new interest in exploring the world around him was rewarded. In the corner of the cafeteria, he was surprised to see a man he knew well. Frank Carpenter had been one of Hugh's best friends in high school, but over time they had drifted apart, mostly because Hugh was married and Frank was not. "Frank, how the hell are you doing? I'm surprised to see you here. How long have you been in Alaska?" Hugh sat down in the empty seat across from his old friend and extended his hand for a firm handshake. "My brother works for your union, and he told me about working here. I've had a ticket with the Teamsters for several years now, and I've been working here for 3 weeks as a truck driver. It's going well so far. It's not too bad when you get used to having nowhere to go but this work camp and construction site." Frank seemed pleased, as was Hugh, to have met a familiar person. The two men continued their pleasant conversation, talking about what had changed in their lives since they had last met. Eventually, the conversation turned to Hugh's life, and after some hesitation to gather his thoughts, Hugh explained his new circumstances to Frank. "Well, a couple weeks ago, things went south in my marriage. I was sent home early from work in Minnesota, just in time to catch my wife with Jerry Black. I moved out and am now in the process of getting a divorce. It proves once again that just when you get too comfortable, things happen that can surprise you to death." Hugh's cheerful mood vanished, and he looked at Frank rather glumly. "I'm sorry to hear that, Hugh. I'm sorry your wife fell for his ravings," Frank said, with a sympathetic expression on his face. I have no idea who was chasing who, Frank. I haven't spoken to that cheating bitch since it happened. I was afraid I was going to lose her, and that would only make it worse. Frank hesitated whether to continue, but finally said, You should probably talk to her. I know what Jerry is like, and he probably has a lot more to do with this than she does. I saw you and your wife several times, and I always got the impression that she was very devoted to you. She was always hanging on your arm, making it clear that you were her man. Yes, I guess you're right. I had already decided this morning that I would contact my sister by email. She and my wife have been communicating like thieves since high school. Maybe my sister can bring me up to speed enough to decide if I should risk talking to my ex. I've already started calling her my ex when I don't think the papers have even been served yet. Hugh shook his head and laughed at his Freudian slip. The two friends moved on to different topics and spent the next half hour in animated conversation. Eventually, they left the cafeteria and went their separate ways. Hugh wanted to set up his computer to see if the promised internet connection was really working. When he finally got his laptop set up and connected to the network, he was able to access his email, something he hadn't done since his trip to Minnesota. It took him almost half an hour to delete the spam that had accumulated in his mail, since he didn't want to delete everything in case he missed something important. He was surprised to notice that Donna hadn't thought to send him any emails as she was flooding his voicemail with her messages. Perhaps her computer wasn't working, but in his opinion, she just hadn't thought of it. With a little thought, Hugh composed his message to his sister. He sincerely hoped he wasn't making a mistake, but at least with email he could say exactly what he wanted to say without interruption. He reread the email one more time before sending it on its way. Hi, Kathy. I never got through to you on the phone, so I thought I'd send you a message to let you know where I am. I work on the North Slope of Alaska. I arrived here a week ago and will be here for at least another 5 weeks. I assume by now you know the whole story from Donna. I never thought she could do that to us, and I still can't talk calmly about it. The distance between us helps a lot, though. She probably hasn't gotten the papers yet, but I've already put the wheels in motion to get the divorce. I'm sorry for what this will do to Bobby. Have you been able to find out how he's doing? I thought about trying to see him before I left, but I was afraid it would be harder on him than if I just disappeared from his life. He doesn't deserve to be in the middle of all this. You can forward this email address to Donna, as I would love to hear what she has to say for herself. Be sure to tell her not to send me message after message like she did on the phone. If she starts doing that again, I'll just cancel this email account and start a new one elsewhere. Hugh. Finished, Hugh closed the laptop and leaned back in his chair. He was beginning to have doubts about suggesting that Donna contact him. He wasn't sure what he wanted to hear from his unfaithful spouse. He closed his eyes for a moment, and the familiar scene from his favorite wedding painting flashed through his mind again. It wasn't until the next night after dinner that Hugh checked his email again, and sure enough, there were messages from both Kathy and Donna. He decided to read what had come from his sister, and decide if Donna's message was even worth reading after he read what Kathy had written. My dear brother, thank you so much for contacting me. I was very worried about you. No one knew where you disappeared to, not even the people I talked to at the union office. Maybe they were just keeping your trust, but if they knew, I wish they had told me. I won't even tell you what went through my head. The reason you couldn't reach me at home is because I was either at Donna's or at the hospital. That Saturday morning, after you told her you knew about her and Jerry, she completely lost her head. She called and told me the version I told you about, but she sounded so bad that I went to her house to calm her down. When I got to her house, I found her in the bathroom. She was crying hysterically, and I saw 2 empty pill bottles on the countertop. She tried to pick up a razor blade from the edge of the tub, but was so exhausted she couldn't pick it up. I called an ambulance and she was taken to the hospital where her stomach was pumped. The psychiatrist who came on call gave her a prescription for antidepressants, and she was discharged 2 days later. She seems to be doing okay now, but I check on her at least twice a day. Once she was back under control, she explained to me what happened, and you are right. At first, she didn't tell the whole story honestly. Now she has told me everything, and I believe she told me the truth. I won't retell you what she told me in case I got something wrong. I told her to email you and tell you everything herself. She will let me know when she emails you, and I will let you know if she doesn't tell you the same thing she told me. Good for you for deleting all those emails from her. I was present when some of them were written, and they were so rambling and incoherent that you wouldn't have been able to make sense of them anyway. Many of them she wrote in the hospital until the meds kicked in. I truly believe she loves you and is truly sorry for everything that has happened. I really hope you can find it in your heart to forgive her, because I believe you two should be together. Your loving sister, Katie. After reading Kathy's message, Hugh decided he had a lot to think about and left Donna's message unread. Instead, he reread Kathy's message over and over again, and then finally turned off the computer and went to bed. He lay awake for 2 hours, thinking about Donna and what a good time they had had, and finally fell into a restless sleep. The next evening, Hugh lingered over dinner, knowing he would have to decide whether to read Donna's letter when he returned to his room. Finally, after drinking his third cup of coffee, he made a conscious decision to go back to his room and read what Donna had wanted to say herself. For some reason, he felt his heart pounding as he opened the letter. My dear Hugh, thank you so much for allowing me to write to you. I realize that I probably have no right to ask you for anything, but I want you to know how much it means to me that you finally talked to me, even if only by email. I'm so eager to hear your voice. First, I want to tell you that Bobby seems to be on the mend. He was at my mom's for a few days when Kathy was busy helping me. The rest of the time he was either at my house or at your sister and her family's house. I told him what I did was wrong and that you were mad at me. I think he understands that. But he asks about you often, and I know he is very sad that you are not here. I feel very hurt that I have deceived your trust in me. I have never done it before, and I will never do it again if you give me a chance to prove it. Please know that I truly and sincerely love you. I don't know what to say about what happened to Jerry Black. I don't know how much you want to hear about it. I'll briefly explain to you what happened, but if you want me to tell you more, just ask me. I'll do whatever you want me to do. I was with him twice at his house. The second time was the night you caught me there, and the first time was the previous Friday night. That first Friday, he called me just after dinner and asked if I wanted to come over for a barbecue since both you and Allison were out of town. I didn't think it would be a problem and agreed. After the burgers, we had a few glasses of wine and then it hit me. We ended up cuddling and kissing on the couch. I knew it was wrong, but I didn't think it would lead to what it led to. I ended up spending the night on his couch. The second time, I should have known better when he called and invited me over for a couple drinks. I declined at first, but he hinted that he would find a way to tell you about our first attempt if I didn't show up. I guess I just expected us to fool around like we did the first time, but it turned out differently. He gave me a few more drinks and soon we were in bed. It can't be explained simply, but this time I spent the night in his bed. You know the rest. I feel so awful about the whole thing. I have never done things like this with him or anyone else at any other time. I had a lot of time to think about what I did, and I can't blame you for how you reacted. If the situation had been reversed, I realize I would have done the exact same thing myself. Please write me back and tell me what you think of me. I am scared to read what you might say, but I pray that you can see some way to forgive me. Your loving wife, Donna. Hugh slowly reread the letter, and his stomach was rumbling. It became especially unpleasant when he reread the paragraphs describing what she had done to Jerry. The fact that she had confirmed what he believed made him wince. He realized that somewhere in the back of his mind, he had hoped to hear that it had all been a mistake on his part. The realization that it wasn't a mistake made him start fighting his feelings again. He turned off the computer and lay down on the bed. He spent the next 2 hours staring at the ceiling and deep in thought until finally sleep overcame him. The next morning, he woke up on top of his blanket, still fully dressed. When he returned to his room, he already knew what he had to do. Without thinking, he turned on his laptop and started writing. Dear Donna, I am very happy to hear that Bobby seems to be on the mend. I don't know if I should let him know that we are communicating or not. If you don't think it would cause a problem, please tell him I think of him often. I will be here for at least another month. After that, I have the option to extend my contract by 2 weeks. I haven't decided what I will do when my first term is up. I think it will depend on what position we find ourselves in. The only way I see that we can get past this is for you to fully describe everything that was said and done when you were with Jerry. If you can't do that, I can't be sure I can get past it. When I know all the sordid details, I'll have a better idea of what I can forgive and whether I can get over it at all. I'm not going to make any promises to you, but I must say that any further betrayal will definitely be the end of us. The only possible way I can get over it is if I feel I can ever regain my trust in you. That's probably more important than whether I can forgive and forget. Take the time to reply to me to be sure you have told me everything. Please copy your letter for Kathy as well. Hugh. Before he sent the message to Donna, he added a CC for Kathy. He felt very relieved that it was done. For the past couple weeks, he had strongly doubted that he would ever communicate with Donna again in any shape or form. If he could get past this first step, maybe they could resolve their serious differences. With the weight off his shoulders after sending the first letter, Hugh decided to go back to the cafeteria and have some coffee, and maybe eat a piece of pie if it seemed appetizing. He was surprised to see that the cafeteria was still crowded, with over 50 employees scattered around the room. Taking a coffee and a piece of apple pie, he headed to the nearest table and sat down across from a few of the workers who were already there. He was about to finish his pie when he happened to look up and noticed that the worker sitting across from him was actually a woman, a rather striking woman with short black hair and very dark eyes. At first glance, he thought she was probably a local, but realized that her skin was very fair. "You seem to really like pie," she said. She watched him with a small, pleasant smile on her face, apparently waiting for his response. "As a matter of fact, I do. I've been here for over a week now, and most of the meals I've had haven't been memorable in the slightest. This piece of pie is the best I've tasted." Having said that, Hugh chuckled and took a sip of coffee. "To tell you the truth, you surprised me. You're the first woman I've seen on this side of the cafeteria tray line. I can tell by your clothes that you work somewhere on the street. What do you work as?" "I'm an electrician. Been working here nonstop for almost 4 months now." "What about you?" she inquired. "I've only been here a couple weeks. I'm a hoist engineer, or crane operator if you prefer." Her eyes ran over his face a few times before she said, "You look a little chipper today. I've seen you in the cafeteria a few times, and you always look so hunted. Something must have changed in your life." "You're very observant," Hugh said. He glanced at her once more as her words surprised him. He hadn't realized that his struggle with his feelings for Donna had affected his appearance as much as his soul. Hugh stared at his coffee for a few moments before continuing. "I came here to get my mind off some serious problems with my wife, and just a few minutes ago I sent her an email. This is the first communication I've had with her in almost 3 weeks. I've actually sent her a couple messages through my sister, but this was the first direct message. They must have been serious if you came here to get away from them and took the ring off." His tablemate picked up her coffee and took a sip, watching him over the rim of the cup. "You're certainly observant since you noticed my ring was missing. The mark was much less white when I first took it off. Yes, things are as serious as they can be between a husband and wife. So serious that I already have a lawyer working on a divorce. Actually, that reminds me, I should ask him to hold off for a few days while she and I have a little talk, or rather, an email correspondence." Hugh smiled and said, "I guess if we're going to talk about the state of my marriage, I should at least introduce myself. My name is Hugh McLean." He extended his hand across the table. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Hugh McLean. My name is Janice Stetler." She raised her right hand and shook John's hand firmly. Hugh noticed that her handshake was very firm for a woman, and her hand was slightly calloused from work. He glanced at her left hand and noticed that there were no rings on it, nor any sign that there had ever been any. As she returned her hand to its original place next to her cup of coffee, a large man stood up from a table 10 feet away and walked over to their table. "Everything okay, Janice?" He had a questioning look on his face. "Oh yes, Billy. This is Hugh McLean. He and I were just having a nice chat. Thanks for asking." She smiled at Billy before answering. When she finished speaking, he waved her off lightly and returned to his seat. What was that about? Hugh hesitated before asking. A questioning expression appeared on his face as this brief exchange left him perplexed. "Oh, Billy's on my team. They're really looking out for me, since there are a few not-so-decent guys working this precinct. I got into serious trouble with one of them my first week on the job, and the rest of my team has been keeping an eye on me ever since." She was very serious now, and her voice lowered. If Billy and one other guy hadn't gotten here in time, something very bad would have happened. Now, whenever any of the men here talk to me, they usually check to see if I have any unwanted advances. It's nice to know they stick up for you like that. I hadn't thought about the problems a woman might face on this construction site. Are you the only one like that? Or are there others I just didn't notice? There are a few others. I don't know exactly how many. We have a separate dormitory from you guys. A few of them are truck drivers, and there's another electrician, but she's not on my shift or crew. Hugh and Janice continued to talk for a while longer, but never returned to the question of the state of his marriage or what had sparked his newfound interest in life. After about 10 minutes, Janice got up to go back to her dorm room. Hugh followed her as he wanted to get a good night's sleep. Tomorrow was another long day in a string of long days ahead of him. As he fell asleep, he thought about how lucky he was to have found such a nice new friend. Perhaps she could give him an unbiased female perspective on things. The next day passed rather quickly for Hugh, and he didn't hear from either Donna or Kathy. He did, however, send a letter to his lawyer asking him to hold off on the divorce. In the evening, he went down for dinner a little later than usual, hoping that he would run into Janice again. He decided to ask her for advice, if she wouldn't mind giving it, of course. Hugh found her sitting at the same table as the previous evening, chatting with her friend Billy. Taking his food, he asked if he could join them, and both insisted that he sit at their table. When they finished their meal, Billy excused himself, saying that he had laundry to do. Janice hurriedly told him that she was fine, and that she would see him at work tomorrow. "I'm in a bit of a quandary, Janice. I'm hoping I can get some feminine advice about my wife's situation. The only person I can ask is my sister, and she is a very good friend of my wife. Would you mind discussing some matters with her?" Hugh sat silent while Janice pondered her answer. "I'm not really qualified to give that kind of advice. I've never been in a situation with a partner that seems to be as serious as the one you've gotten yourself into. I was married, but it ended abruptly, without a divorce. My husband was killed by a hit-and-run driver a little over 2 years ago. However, if you think I can help, please ask your questions." "I'm very sorry to hear that your husband lost his life, especially in this way. It must have been difficult. I didn't know you were married. Maybe we should forget about all of this. It's probably a bad idea on my part." "No, go ahead. I just wanted to warn you that you're not going to get some expert here." Janice laughed and took another sip of coffee. "All right," Hugh replied calmly. "I'll keep this as short and to the point as I can. I found out a couple weeks ago that my wife had a brief affair with a friend of mine. She's been with him twice. He seems to have used wine, some manipulation, and even a vague threat to help overcome her inhibitions. But I don't think it was anything like an assault. At one point, she seems to have been at least partially consenting. She'll presumably send me a detailed description of what actually happened, but of course it will only be her words." Hugh fell silent, taking a slow sip from his cup of coffee. He could see that Janice was listening intently to his words, and so he continued. "It sounds like she's really serious about saying it will never happen again. Donna apparently tried to commit suicide and is now on antidepressants. I'm not exactly sure how I feel about her, but she says she still loves me." He took another sip of coffee and spoke again. "In order for things to work out, I have to believe her, forgive her, try to forget what happened, and finally trust her. I just don't know if any of that is possible. I guess I'd like your opinion on what my wife did." Hugh laughed and said, "I won't necessarily agree, and I certainly won't blame you if it's wrong. I'm just desperate for another opinion. Wow, that's a tough one. I was hoping I could put myself in her shoes, but from what you've told me, it might not be easy. I just can't imagine myself alone with my husband's friend, drinking and agreeing to anything sexual. I'm afraid that wouldn't be me. Still, she seems very remorseful. Janice raised her eyes to the ceiling, deep in thought, and a few moments passed before she continued. I would advise you to proceed slowly and calmly and see if you have a way to verify her story. How about contacting your former friend that she was with? If you could check with him about some of her story, or make sure she is telling you the truth now, maybe that would help you make a decision. Other than that, I think it all depends on how you feel about her. If you can dispense with the facts, perhaps time will take care of the rest. Hugh pondered her words for a few moments before answering. You know, I think you've helped me. I think I'm going to take things slow and quiet. I don't want to contact my former friend about this, and I'm not sure I'll believe everything he tells me. Right now, I don't have a chance to verify what she's telling me, but maybe something will become clearer. Thank you for at least thinking about my problem and offering advice. I'll keep thinking about it until I get the next email from her. Now, I guess it's time to get off the subject. Why don't you tell me something about yourself? Janice blushed slightly when Hugh suggested she tell her about herself. Well, I don't really have much to say. I'm 30, I'm a widow, as I said, and I'm an electrician. When I'm not busy with jobs like this, I live in Seattle. This is my last tour here. I finish in 2 more days, and I should have enough money to buy my own place. My husband left me with a bunch of debt, not on purpose, of course, and I finally got out of it a few months ago. On my last break at home, I managed to get a job in the maintenance department of the power plant, so once I leave here, I won't have to worry about going back anymore. She gave him a pleasant smile as she stopped talking and sipped some more coffee. Damn, I didn't realize you'd be gone so soon. I've enjoyed your company and our little chats, and I might have a few more questions to ask you. Hugh smiled, then shrugged. Looks like I'll have to make my own way. Truth be told, in the end, it will be my decision. Maybe seeking your advice is just a way to delay the inevitable. They made small talk for a few more minutes before deciding it was time to call it a day. They agreed to have coffee together the next night. That night, as he fell asleep, Hugh's thoughts alternated between his conversation with Janice and images from his life with Donna and Bobby. After work the next day, there were still no messages from Donna and Kathy. He realized he couldn't rush things. Everything now depended on Donna. Later that evening, Hugh went down to the cafeteria and spent a pleasant hour with Janice, most of the time discussing fishing, a sport they both enjoyed. They agreed to meet the next evening for a farewell cup of coffee. When Hugh checked his email that evening, he received the 2 messages he had been expecting. Judging by the time stamps on the messages, he must have just missed them the previous evening. He thought long and hard about which one to open and finally decided to leave both until later in the evening. He could have been in a good mood when he joined Janice and her coworkers for coffee on her last night in the dorm. After shaving and combing his hair, he headed to the cafeteria. Janice was sitting at her usual table, and this time it looked like she had her entire team with her, intent on making her last night at the construction site a memorable one. There was much laughter and joking. When Hugh entered the cafeteria, Janice immediately called out to him, insisting that he join their group. He grabbed a soft drink and walked over to their table. Welcome, Hugh. I'm glad you could join our little get-together. These guys are the team I've been working with since I got here. Janice introduced Hugh to them, explaining that he was the only nice guy she'd ever encountered who wasn't an electrician. This elicited a raucous laugh from Hugh. He soon joined the others in their jokes, many of which were addressed to Janice. Over the next hour, the crew gradually dwindled as people left. Eventually, only Hugh and Janice were left at the table, and he said, "This was much more fun than reading my wife's last letter. It should detail exactly what happened, and I'm not ashamed to admit that I don't really want to read it. Hopefully, when I finish it, I won't decide to fly back and strangle them both." He laughed, but it was a nervous laugh, for his last statement was very close to what he was really thinking. "Well, Hugh McLean, I don't think you're the sort to take the law into your own hands. I'm sure they're safe enough, though obviously you'll have to deal with the state of your marriage. I hope things work out well and that whatever happens, you'll be happy in the end. You seem to be the kind of man who deserves a happy ending." She smiled at him and then took his hand for a final handshake. She stood up, intending to return to her room to begin packing for the morning flight to civilization. Hugh was confused but finally said, "I'm very glad to have met you, Janice. It's nice to have a friendly face that I look forward to meeting. I have enjoyed our conversations very much, and perhaps someday I will come to your part of the country to see if the fishing here is really as good as you say." He took her hand in both of his and shook it one last time. As she walked away, he felt that familiar feeling of loneliness again. He sat at the table for another 15 minutes before he too went to his room. Sitting down at his computer, Hugh decided to read his sister's email first, expecting it to be shorter. He opened Katie's message and read it slowly. "Dear Hugh, I have read Donna's letter and have only a couple things to add to it. First, when she first told me what happened, she indicated that Jerry gave her more wine than she mentions now. I also recall that the second time she was at his house, he had to hold her hand to help her up the stairs to the second floor because she had too much to drink to climb the stairs on her own. I seriously considered the possibility that he might have put something in her drinks, something that made them stronger than usual. I called her and asked her why she downplayed these things, and she said she didn't want it to look like she was blaming Jerry for everything. She wants to take her share of responsibility for what happened. Whatever you think of her in regards to what happened, I want you to know that I believe her when she says she loves you and that she would never do anything like that to hurt you again. Your loving sister, Katie." Hugh sat in silence for several minutes, pondering his sister's words in her message. He wondered, too, if Jerry had slipped something into Donna's drinks. It wasn't beyond the realm of possibility, and certainly spoke in her favor. Either way, he would have to read her message before he could make a decision on that. Now that he had no more excuses not to open Donna's letter, he clicked on it. A few moments later it opened, filling the entire screen. He sat staring at it, afraid to start reading the words he knew were going to upset him terribly. "My dear Hugh, this is my third attempt to begin this letter. I have spent hours just staring at this screen, trying to decide what to say. You asked me to tell you the whole story, nothing but the truth, and as hard as it is for me, I intend to do so. First, before you read this, I have to tell you that I really and truly love you. I would give anything to be able to erase the past and the mistakes I have made. I pray that you decide to give me another chance to be the wife you deserve. Before I get to the details, I have to say that I told Bobby that you are thinking of him, and he is very happy to hear that. He still asks about you every day, wondering when you're coming home. I don't want to give him false hopes, so I said you and I still have a lot to talk about. There seems to be no way for me to avoid the details of what happened between Jerry and me, so I might as well just do it. As far as I know and remember, I'm telling you everything exactly. If anything seems unclear to you, or if you have any questions for me, please ask me, and let me forget this horrible memory. That first Friday, Jerry called me at work around 2 o'clock and asked if I wanted to come over for dinner. He was planning on making hamburgers and salad. I told him I didn't think it would be appropriate since you were out of town and Allison was in California. He insisted that neither you nor Allison would mind, and I finally agreed. When I arrived, it was about 6 o'clock, and he was standing on the patio setting up the barbecue. He brought me a glass of wine, and we sat on the patio just talking about the usual things, the things we always talked about when both couples were together. He made a few remarks about my looks and how much he appreciated my figure. I laughed at them, as I didn't think he was saying anything different than he usually did. We ate on the patio and eventually took all the dishes to the kitchen, where I started rinsing the plates and putting everything in the dishwasher. While I was bent over the dishwasher, he came up behind me and put his hand on my butt. After my request, it took him a few seconds to remove his hand, but he finally did. He stayed by my side the entire time I was doing the dishes, but didn't do or say anything inappropriate. By this time, it was almost 8 o'clock, and after pouring me more wine, he took me into the living room. He sat down in an armchair, and I settled down on the sofa. We continued talking, and around 8:30 he turned up the music on the stereo and then took my glass into the kitchen to refill it with wine. Sometime around 9 o'clock he got up and walked over to where I was sitting to ask me to dance with him. There was no reason to refuse, and I joined him for 2 or 3 songs. We danced quite close, and I was beginning to feel the effects of the wine. Jerry just guffawed when I asked him to back off a bit, so I didn't pay much attention as we danced the next few songs. When the slow songs were over, I went back to my seat, but this time he sat next to me and put his hand on my shoulder. He took it away when I asked him to, but continued to sit next to me. After a couple minutes, he put his arm around me again, and this time I didn't insist that he take it away. And for nothing, because now I think it was all he needed. He held out my wine glass to me and coaxed me to finish it so he could get me a refill. By this time his glass was empty, and I felt obliged to finish mine. When he brought the glasses, he sat down next to me again and hugged me. I felt flushed from the wine and agreed with him when he suggested we pretend we were young again. We drank some more wine and eventually got down to it. He tried to talk me into going upstairs with him, but I just pushed him away after realizing what I had done. I cried and curled up on the couch. He tried again, but I remember slapping him and telling him to leave me alone. Jerry got up and left, and I apparently fell asleep there on the couch. At 6 o'clock in the morning, I woke up with a bad headache lying on the couch. I was so upset that I ran barefoot to my car and drove home. All the next week I was very angry with him and didn't respond to the few messages he left on our answering machine. Finally, on Friday afternoon, he called my office again. He asked me to come over to his place that evening, and when I flatly refused, he said he just wanted to make amends for what had happened. After I continued to refuse, he said he hoped he wouldn't accidentally blab to you about our fooling around. It wasn't hard to realize that he was trying to warn me that I had better come, so I finally agreed even though I really didn't want to go. He asked me to come at 8:30, which I did. In no way did I want anything to happen, although I was afraid we might end up doing fondling and petting like we did the first time. The outfit I wore was the least revealing, as I hoped he wouldn't get the urge to try anything. When I arrived, he handed me a glass of white wine, and we sat in the kitchen at the table, drinking it and talking. I told him how upset I was about the previous Friday, and he apologized. He wasn't getting anywhere, so I relaxed and didn't mind when he filled my glass with wine. I guess it wasn't even an hour after I came in that I noticed the effects of the wine. I had about a glass and a half, but I felt like I would have felt after 3 or 4. I don't mean to say that he put something stronger in my wine, but I thought it was strange that it had such a quick effect on me. The next moment, Jerry led me to the stairs upstairs. He said that we had soiled the couch last time, and he didn't want to clean it again. For some reason, that made sense to me, and I went with him up the stairs to the master bedroom. Once we were in the bedroom, we got down to it. The next thing I knew, I woke up just as the sun was coming up. I was lying in bed with Jerry, facing him. He was asleep, so I carefully got up, gathered my clothes from the floor, and went to the bathroom. When I came back, he asked me where I was going. I told him I was going to get dressed and leave, but he didn't like that. He wanted more. And he did. You know the rest? When I got home, saw your note, and found the ring, I really lost my head. Kathy has told you about it in quite a bit of detail, so I won't repeat myself. I just finished reading everything I wrote to you describing what happened those 2 nights, and I really don't know what you'll think of it. As much as I blame Jerry, especially for that last time, there's no doubt that a lot of it was my fault. I shouldn't have gone back there a second time after what happened the first time, and after the effect his drinks had on me. I would have been much better off telling you about the first incident and accepting your justified reaction to it than going there again. I can't predict what you will think of me now, and I am very tempted to just delete this whole post rather than send it to you. It takes a very strong person to forgive me for this, and I can easily understand that it would be very hard for you to trust me again, considering how stupid I acted. Please know that I love you. There is nothing I wouldn't do to make it up to you, and I just pray that you'll give me a chance. I ask you to wait a few days before you let me know your decision. because I know how upset you will be when you finish this message. Your loving wife, Donna. Hugh sat as if suspended, finishing Donna's letter until he finally closed it, turned off the light, and lay down on the bed. The story of her infidelity had hit him much harder than he'd expected. His chest felt empty. Images from reading her long letter flashed through his mind. At some point during the night, he must have dozed off for a few minutes, but in the morning he realized it wouldn't last long. Almost the entire night had been spent thinking about her message and everything that followed from it. When he got up, he was still fully dressed from the previous day, so his first decision was to grab some fresh clothes and go down to the shower room. When he returned, he felt much better, and standing under the hot jets of the shower, he came to a final decision. He pulled a suitcase out of the small closet, took out a framed photograph from their wedding day, and set it on the bedside table. After much thought, he decided to try to make a relationship work and wanted to be able to see his family every morning when he opened his eyes. He headed to the cafeteria to get breakfast, the start of another long day. That evening, while sitting in the cafeteria, he happened to look up and saw his friend Frank Carpenter walk in. "Frank, come in and sit down. Where have you been lately? I haven't seen you in a couple weeks." Frank joined Hugh at the table and said, "Yeah, it's been a while. They're short on truck drivers, so I've been moonlighting a little. I saw you here a few times this evening, but you were busy talking to a woman, so I decided not to bother you. It's okay if you came over. I just wanted her advice on what's going on with Donna. How are you doing? I was wondering how you were dealing with all this." Hugh smiled and said, "Believe it or not, last night I finally decided what I was going to do. After reading the details of what happened between her and Jerry, I'm almost convinced that Jerry either put pure alcohol in her drinks or gave her something. She made some very stupid decisions, but I'm inclined to believe her story. I don't know of any way to prove he did anything to her drinks, and I doubt I'll believe anything he says about it." "Well, you're a much more forgiving person than I am. I wish you luck." They diverted from the subject of Donna and Jerry and moved on to more mundane topics about their work and the trials and tribulations of working at a remote facility. As they parted, they agreed to try to spend more time together, especially at dinner. Back in his room, Hugh decided that he was too tired to answer Donna's letter that evening and would leave that task for the next evening. It was very easy for him to fall asleep that night, as he now felt that there was hope for the family's salvation. The next evening, Hugh hurried back from dinner so that he would have time to send the letter to Donna. He thought for a long time about what to say and immediately began typing. "Dear Donna, as you can imagine, the details of your interactions with Jerry were very difficult for me, and I spent a sleepless night going over in my mind everything that happened between the two of you. I spent a great deal of time pondering your words, and I think I've come to my decision. First, I've decided to admit that you've told me the whole story. I have no reason to think that you made up the details of what happened, and I have no other way to prove or disprove what you have told me. Second, it sounds very much like Jerry either intentionally got you drunk or perhaps gave you something. Your descriptions of how you felt, combined with the realization that you made some really stupid decisions, suggest that what happened was not something you would normally agree to. If I believe what I just wrote, then I'm going to have to try to forgive you for your part in all of this. It may take a long time before I fully forgive you, but I'm working on it. I will probably never forget what happened, and it will be hard for me to fully trust you. I will work on not punishing you for what happened. You will have to be patient with me through all of this, and you will have to be completely honest and faithful to me in the future. I'm not promising that I'll never bring it up again, but I'll try very hard not to keep it in your head. It's not going to be easy for us to get past all of this, but I'm willing to try. When I get back from here, we can get together and talk about it a little before I go back to the house. I'm really looking forward to seeing you and Bobby, and I'm looking forward to my last day here. Your husband." Hugh reread what he had written several times before finally hitting the send button. When the message finally disappeared from the screen, he let out a long sigh, not realizing that he had stopped to hold his breath while making his final decision. Over the next few days, Hugh and Donna exchanged emails. She was thrilled that he had decided to give her another chance, and he was becoming more and more resigned to his decision. His sister wrote him a long email congratulating him on making the right choice. All in all, it was a pleasant time for both of them. It had been 4 days since Hugh and Frank Carpenter had last met in the cafeteria. Upon entering the cafeteria, Hugh saw his friend sitting at a table and immediately joined him, picking up his food. "So, Frank, how's it going?" Hugh took a bite of his food, waiting for Frank's answer. "Not great." Frank reached under the table and pulled out a pair of crutches. "I was checking my load this morning and some pipes shifted and caught my left leg. I was told I had a couple broken bones in the top of my foot, so now I've got a temporary cast on it. Looks like I'll be able to go home early for compensation." "Damn, Frank, that's no fun. How does it feel? Does it hurt?" "Actually, it's fine right now. Only if I put pressure on my foot do I feel pain, so that rules out driving anything with a clutch. Unfortunately, that's all they have here, nothing but standard transmissions. They'll put me on the road in the morning and I'll be home by tomorrow evening." "I almost envy you. I have a couple more weeks here before I can go back and see how Donna and I managed to get back together. We've been exchanging emails and so far things look good, but I expect our living in the same room together to be a real challenge." "So you're okay with getting back together with her? No doubts?" Hugh thought for a second and replied, "I guess I've always had my doubts, but I don't have a way to check her story. I won't contact Jerry about it, and what else can I do? Hopefully by looking her in the eye when we talk about it, I'll know everything I need to know. All I can say is that you are a better man than I am, Hugh. I doubt very much if I would be so lenient. Mind you, I've never been married, so it's easy for me to say that." Frank left his comments at that, and the two of them finished their meal in relative silence. When they resumed their conversation, it was about work matters, and the fact that Frank would have a long day of airports and flights the next day. Over the next week, Hugh and Donna exchanged emails daily, and he increasingly liked the thought that their marriage might become a reality. He knew now that he hadn't stopped loving her, and he had serious issues with forgiveness and forgetting, but he felt he could work on them if he had some time. All in all, though, he was happy and looking forward to seeing his stay in Alaska come to an end. On Friday evening, Hugh returned to his room in high spirits. One more week, and he would be home. It couldn't come soon enough. He turned on his laptop, expecting to get only the daily email from Donna, but saw that he also had a message from Frank Carpenter. He couldn't wait to hear from Donna, so he read her message first. There was nothing new in it. All she did was repeat how much she wanted him to come home. Hugh liked reading her messages because they reinforced to him that he had made the right decision, so he immediately replied to her message. In his reply, he told her how much he was looking forward to being home. Deciding to save Frank's message for later, Hugh went down to the cafeteria for a leisurely dinner. Now that Frank and Janice Stetler were gone, he kept to himself. Many of the workers were quite rough, and Hugh didn't really fit in with their company. He preferred his company to their company. Eventually, he returned to his room and decided to read Frank's letter. Calling it up, he saw that there were attachments to the letter and wondered what Frank had sent him. He expected to find in it the latest racy cartoon or picture that was now gobbling around the internet. "Hugh, before you open the attached pictures, you'd better read my entire message. I will try to explain what is depicted in the photos, as it is not always obvious. While I was flying here, I started thinking about your situation with Donna and thought I would try to help you decide whether or not you should trust her. My car has an automatic transmission, so I knew I could get around in it without any problems. Since I am into photography and my salary is paid by compensation, I decided to try to keep an eye on your wife for you. For the last 5 days, I have been checking on her at home and at work, just checking in to see where she has been. I also went in and checked on Jerry Black a few times, just to see what he was up to. Everything was perfectly fine until today. I went to Donna's work at noon to check on her car, and just as I pulled up, she pulled out of the parking lot ahead of me. Since I had nothing better to do, I decided to just follow her and see what she was doing on her lunch break. She pulled into the mall parking lot. I parked 2 rows away from her and waited for her to enter the mall. I don't get around very well on crutches, so I didn't feel like following her in. It's a good thing I didn't go because she came back 15 minutes later. I saw her walking toward me and Jerry Black was with her. I took a picture of them, tagging them with number 1. Because I was parked, I had a very good view of them the whole time. They were standing and talking near your wife's car, and she had her back to it with her hands on the hood. That's mark number 2. They talked for a couple minutes, but I couldn't tell from the look on your wife's face whether she was happy about it or not. Her expression was pretty neutral the whole time. Suddenly, Jerry leaned forward and kissed her. This kiss is labeled number 3. It wasn't just a brief peck on the lips, it lasted at least 2 or 3 seconds. I was just about to take the second picture when he pulled back. She didn't move when he kissed her, didn't try to move away or push him away. There's no telling what she said to him, and as she leaned back, she may have lost her balance and couldn't raise her hand to push him away. I just don't know. They talked for a few more seconds and then she got into her car. His car was only 3 parking spaces away from hers, and he pulled out of his spot before she got moving. She pulled out behind him and I tried to skip behind them, but I was held up by a couple other cars pulling out in front of me. I proceeded to the exit, and my last photo, number 4, shows both of their cars standing at the intersection turning left. The traffic light had just turned, and I found myself wedged behind the 2 cars so I couldn't follow them any further. By the time I pulled into the street, neither of them were in sight. I spent the next 2 hours driving around town trying to find Donna's car, but I never did. I've been to your house twice, to her office parking lot, several times to Jerry's house, and even drove through the parking lots of all the motels down the street from the mall. But I didn't find them there either, much to my delight. I just have no idea where they went. I finally gave up, but when I pulled up to your house at 5 o'clock, her car was there. Out of curiosity, I drove by Jerry's house again, but his car wasn't there. That's all I can tell you about these photographs. I'll have to leave it up to you to decide what they mean. I really hope it's not what it looks like. There may be a good explanation, but I'm afraid you'll have to find out from her. I will continue to follow her until you return. If I don't contact you, know that I don't see anything suspicious. And don't worry about Jerry. I have plans for him. Tail, Frank. Finished reading the letter, Hugh sat dazed, almost in shock. He finally opened the attached photos and looked at each one 3 or 4 times before closing the letter and shutting down the laptop. He collapsed on his bed and lay staring at the ceiling in deep thought for almost 20 minutes. Suddenly, he got up and went back to the computer. After much thought, he decided to write Donna a message that was going to ruin their relationship. He had already decided what the message would be about and started typing it as soon as he sat down at his desk. He knew it had to sound just like all the others he had sent her lately. My dear Donna, a thought occurred to me that I wanted to put in my last message to you. Have you been bothered by Jerry since you were at his house for the second time? You haven't mentioned any messages from him, and I'm just wondering if he's been in touch with you since then. What about Allison? She must be back from California by now. How have you been in touch with her? I can't imagine him leaving you alone after everything that's happened. Please let me know if there are any problems with him. I can call him when I get back, just so he knows that his attention is not appreciated by any of us. I am a little tired today, so I am ending this message and will write you again tomorrow. Your loving husband. After sending the message, Hugh went to bed, but slept very little that night. He spent most of the night looking at the photograph he kept on his bedside table and thinking about the unexpected turn his life had taken. He had almost convinced himself that his life and marriage were back on track, and that confidence was shaken badly by Frank's message. He had never considered himself a religious man, but now he prayed that Donna would provide a logical explanation for what had happened in the mall parking lot. The next day passed for Hugh as if in slow motion. He spent all his free time wondering what Donna would say, and it bothered him greatly that when he returned to his room in the evening, there were no new messages in his email account. On any other day, he would have had a message waiting for him. Hugh ate a quick meal, and after making sure there was no message from Donna, went to bed. He was just about to fall asleep when he heard a faint zing, indicating that an email had arrived. He immediately got to his feet and headed for the computer, not thinking about sleep. He quickly called up the email message from Donna, but didn't immediately notice the time. It was 9:30 in Alaska, which meant she had sent the message at 1:30 a.m. her time. Why was she texting him so late at night, he wondered. Had she really just gotten home? Unable to wait any longer, he opened the long-awaited letter. My dear Hugh, gosh, 2 messages in one evening. I'm not used to that. I'm glad you asked me about Allison and if I've heard from her since she got back from California. She called me twice, once last night. I put her off as I didn't want to see her. I'm afraid I'll feel too guilty for what happened and confess everything to her. After everything that has happened to our marriage, I don't want to ruin it. I'm sure she would leave him if she found out. She once told me that she suspected he was having an affair or two, so my confirmation of that would probably spur her to take drastic action. Jerry called me twice, both times a couple days after you found out about us. Both times I told him I didn't want to hear from him again, and he hasn't called me since. I saw him driving down the street once last week, but after that I haven't seen him at all. I have no desire to see him again. There were several paragraphs in Donna's message about how she couldn't wait to see him, and he reread them twice to make sure they didn't say anything else about Jerry. When he was finally satisfied that she hadn't added anything else on the subject, he closed the notebook rudely. His eyes glistened with unshed tears as he walked over to the table beside the bed and picked up the photograph. Taking one look at it, he threw it across the room, screaming, "You lying bitch!" The picture hit the corner of the closet with a clatter, scattering shards of glass and chips from the frame across the room. A moment later, there was a knock on the door and someone asked, "Are you all right, buddy?" Hugh shook his head, and a moment later was back in the here and now from where his consciousness had taken him. "Yeah, I'm fine. Sorry about the noise." It took him half an hour to remove the glass and wood from the floor and sweep up the small splinters. When they were all in the trash can, he picked up the photograph. It was punctured in 2 places and torn down the center from top to halfway down. Hugh could see that the tear would almost completely separate him from Donna and Bobby if it continued. He carefully pulled at both halves and, when the painting was completely torn in 2, tossed them into the wastebasket. Hugh now felt surprisingly calm and sat down at the computer again. He spent half an hour starting a new email account for himself, researched how to cancel the old one, and sent messages to Frank and his lawyer to let them both know his new contact information. When he was done, he was ready to reply to Donna, quoting her last message and attaching the 4 photos Frank had sent him. Lies. 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 How could you do this to me? Did you think that because I was going to take you back, you could do whatever you wanted? Did you really think I was such a simpleton that you could feed me any nonsense? I already told you what happens if you're not completely honest with me. You'll get divorce papers from my lawyer. I'll stay here for a few more weeks, and he'll take care of everything. This email account will be canceled as soon as I finish sending this message. Don't even try to contact me. I don't want to hear from your lying ass anymore. It is clear from the pictures I'm attaching to this message that you lied about seeing Jerry again, and I'm wondering where you went to get him. I'm also wondering how many other lies you've told me. Frankly, I'm not interested in knowing the answers. I'm not even going to blame you for the pain I'm in right now. It's my own fault. I got some good advice, not to rush back to you, and I ignored it. I thought I could trust you. Silly me. Hugh sent the letter to his sister as well. He suspected she knew about Donna's lies, and he didn't want to talk to her. Before closing the laptop, Hugh deleted his old email account. He felt completely drained and exhausted, and it didn't take him long to fall asleep curled up in a ball. The next morning, before going to work, Hugh extended his contract for another 2 weeks. He wanted and needed that much time to settle down before returning home. Besides, this time would give him the opportunity to decide what course his life would take. Kathy Roberts sat at the kitchen table drinking coffee until the kids got up. It was barely 7 in the morning, but that was her usual time to get up and take some time to herself. This morning, however, she was startled by a light tapping on the kitchen door. When she went to the door, she was shocked to see her brother Hugh there. "Hughie, where did you come from? Come in." She grabbed his arm and dragged him into the kitchen. "I've been in town for a few days and just wanted to stop by to say goodbye before I left." "Say goodbye? What do you mean? Where are you going?" She looked at him with an expression of deep concern on her face. Hugh walked past her and poured himself a cup of coffee before answering. "Like I said, I came to say goodbye. I sold my car and bought a pickup truck with a matching box cover. I've loaded all my stuff from storage into it, and I'm ready to hit the road. I thought I'd let you know so you can tell the rest of the family. You can't leave without talking to Donna." Kathy reached for the phone, but before she could dial, Hugh snatched the receiver from her and hung it up. "I'm not going to talk to Donna. If you try to call her again, I'll just leave right now." Hugh sat down at the table and took a sip of coffee. Kathy was visibly upset and said, "You should talk to her. Let her tell you what happened at the mall. Jerry came out of nowhere, and she was telling him to leave her alone when he leaned over and kissed her. She didn't have time to react. She can explain that it was just a coincidence that she pulled out of the parking lot right behind him." Hugh said with a nonchalant expression on his face, "It doesn't matter anymore, Kathy. I'm not going to take any more chances and let her hurt me. Tell me honestly, how can I ever believe or trust her again? What you just told me could be true, but if it is, why didn't she tell me that instead of the lies she wrote?" There were tears in Katie's eyes. She was afraid you would misunderstand everything. It was a stupid thing to do, but that doesn't mean you should give up on her. She's devastated and realizes she screwed up big time again. She tried emailing you, but the emails kept bouncing back. She even found a phone number, but all she could do was leave a message for you. I know she left messages. They gave them to me, but I threw them away. I seriously told her that I didn't want any more contact with her. My lawyer told me she already has the divorce papers, but she hasn't sent him a signed copy yet. I signed everything I needed to sign while I was here this week. Now it's just a formality. They don't even need her signature. It's just that I'll be free of her a little longer without it." Tears ran down Katie's cheeks, and she wiped them away before saying, "She broke it off. She doesn't want a divorce. She just wants you to come back to her. I would really like it if you would come and talk to her. I'm sure you can understand how much she's going through and what all this has done to her." "That's not going to happen, Kathy. She might decide to pursue Jerry for real if she can get past Allison. I'm fine with that. I really care." Hugh took another sip of coffee, maintaining a nonchalant look. "You don't know, do you? Someone called Allison and told her about Jerry and Donna. She met with Donna, and Donna told her what happened. Allison threw a cup at her and it hit her in the face. All that was left was a bruise. After that, Allison packed up her things and moved to California to stay with her sister." Kathy threw Hugh a questioning look, then continued, "I don't suppose you know about Jerry, do you? He was attacked about 2 weeks ago. My neighbor works at the hospital, and she said he was in intensive care. 2 men attacked him with pieces of rebar. You didn't set that up, did you?" Hugh smiled to himself when Kathy asked if he was involved. "No, I had nothing to do with it. If I had known who it was, I would have gladly bought him a beer or a few beers. It couldn't have happened to a better guy." Kathy sat in silence for several minutes, thinking about how to get Hugh to talk to Donna. Finally, she said, "Will you talk to Donna if I call her and give you the phone number? Will you do that for me, please?" "I really can't talk to her, Kathy. There's no way I'm going to change my mind about divorcing her. The more I thought about this Jerry thing, the more I realized that she's not just stupid. I believe that somewhere deep down inside, she wanted to make contact with him. If I agree to talk to her, it will only fuel her hopes, and that would be unfair to her and Bobby. I'm fine with my decision." Tears came back into Kathy's eyes, and she said, "I think I can understand that. Where are you going to go? Do you have something in mind?" Hugh finished his coffee, stood up and turned toward the door, getting ready to leave. "I'm going to try the Northwest. I have a contact in Seattle, so that's where I'm headed right now. If things work out in Seattle, I'll stay there. If not, who knows? I just know I can't stay here anymore. I'll email you later when I have a place to stay and I get my cell phone back on. I have enough money left over from Alaska to last me for a while. The union gave me a transfer sheet, so I'll be able to join the local branch of the structural engineers. Katie stood up and gave her brother a big hug before they said their goodbyes, and he walked out the door. As she watched him leave, tears ran down her cheeks again, and she wiped them away as she closed the door and went to the phone. The end. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.